August 7th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The air is a thick, wet blanket, smelling of rot and rain and fear. For Corporal Richard Hay, a 23-year-old from the 1st Marine Battalion, every inch of forward movement is a battle. He isn't fighting the enemy, he's fighting the island itself. Mud, the color of rust and blood, sucks at his boots, try to pull him down into the earth. The jungle presses in from all sides, a suffocating green wall that chokes the light and muffles sound, turning the world into a claustrophobic tunnel. Every leaf could hide a snake, every shadow could hide a soldier, and every sound could be the last you ever hear. Hay is crawling, his M1 Garand held high out of the muck, his senses screaming. The jungle isn't quiet. It's a cacophony of buzzing insects, screeching birds, and a drip, drip, drip of water from the canopy 100 feet above. But through that wall of sound, a new noise punches through. It's not the familiar, thunderous report of a Garand or the chattering burp of a Browning automatic rifle. It's a sharp, distinct crack, like a giant snapping a dry twig. About 125 feet to his right, Sergeant Williams, a man who had survived the chaos of the beach landings without a scratch, suddenly stiffens. His head snaps back as if yanked by an invisible wire. His helmet, the very symbol of a soldier's protection, makes a sickening tink as a small, neat hole appears just above the brim. He collapses without a sound, a puppet whose strings have been cut, his face disappearing into the reddish-brown sludge. Panic erupts. Marines dive for cover, eyes wide, scanning the impenetrable wall of green. They see nothing. No musliflas, no wisp of smoke, no movement, just the indifferent, suffocating jungle. This was the new reality on the canal. Over the next 72 hours, 14 more Marines from the 1st Regiment would die in exactly the same way. A single, sharp crack. A man falls, and the shooter remains a ghost. The Japanese snipers were waging a campaign of pure terror, one that no one in the American High Command had anticipated. They were phantoms in the trees, turning the jungle from a simple obstacle into a hunter's paradise. They were masters of their craft. But what these invisible assassins could never have imagined was that their very own terrifying effectiveness would provoke a response so brutal, so disproportionate, that would not only silence them, but would rewrite the rules of jungle warfare forever. This is the story of how the United States Marine Corps, faced with an enemy they couldn't see, decided that if you can't find the needle in a haystack, you simply burn the entire haystack to the ground. This is the psychological terror of the invisible enemy. The Japanese snipers, or CDI, were not ordinary riflemen. They were disciples of an ancient art, elevated to a lethal science. Their training was an ordeal of body and mind, lasting for months, sometimes years. They learned to become one with their environment, to erase the line between man and nature. Their camouflage was a living thing, a meticulously crafted suit of leaves, vines, and branches called a jari, tied directly to their bodies. They painted their faces with mud and vegetable pigments, their skin becoming just another patch of bark, their eyes just another pair of shadows in the foliage. Before the first rays of dawn would pierce the dense canopy, these men would already be in position. They would scale the massive banyan and kapok trees, climbing 80, sometimes over 100 feet into the air, finding a perch that gave them a god's-eye view of the muddy trails below. There they would remain utterly motionless for 8, 10, sometimes 14 hours straight. They were paragons of patience and discipline. Some would even tie themselves to the thick branches with rope, a grim precaution to ensure that if they were killed, or even if they fell asleep, their bodies would not betray their position by falling to the ground. They would simply hang there, another silent, lifeless part of the jungle's architecture. Their weapon of choice was the Arisaka Type 99 rifle. Chambered in 7.7 millimeters, it was a robust and accurate bolt-action rifle, capable of hitting a man-sized target from nearly 500 yards. But the Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal weren't interested in long-range marksmanship. They deliberately chose to engage their targets at less than 110 yards. This wasn't about increasing the odds of a hit. It was about maximizing the psychological impact. They wanted the Marines to hear the sharp crack of the rifle. They wanted them to see their friend, their sergeant, their captain fall dead just a few feet away. They wanted the Americans to know, with chilling certainty, that the ghosts were close. Always close, and always watching. If you want to see how the Marines devised a solution as brutal as it was ingenious against these invisible marksmen, go ahead and smash that like button. It truly helps our channel share more incredible, forgotten stories like this one. And please, subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what comes next. The problem facing the Marines was simple in its premise, but devastating in its execution. The Japanese snipers were practically invisible. The triple canopy jungle of Guadalcanal was a sniper's Eden. The canopy soared to heights of 100 feet, creating a dense ceiling of millions upon millions of leaves. A single man, motionless, draped in vegetation, 80 feet up in the air, was as indistinguishable from the surrounding foliage as one leaf among a million. The Marines, desperate to stop the bleeding, tried everything in their playbook. They sent out observation teams, squads of men armed with powerful binoculars, whose sole job was to stare into the suffocating green for hours on end, their eyes watering from the strain. They found nothing. They tried brute force, spraying the canopies of suspicious-looking trees with entire magazines from their M1918 Browning automatic rifles. The snipers would simply wait, silent and patient, for the storm of bullets to pass. And then, hours later, another Marine would fall from a single, well-aimed shot, sometimes from the very tree that had just been riddled with holes. The futility was soul-crushing. They even brought in tracker dogs, hoping their keen sense of smell could pinpoint the hidden enemy. But the dogs were useless. A man perched 100 feet in the air left no scent trail on the ground. The humid, stagnant air of the jungle did little to carry the scent downwards, leaving the dogs confused and whining, unable to solve a three-dimensional puzzle. In the first 3 agonizing weeks of the Guadalcanal campaign, these ghost-like snipers killed 89 Marines and wounded dozens more. But the psychological damage was infinitely worse than the physical casualties. A deep, gnawing paranoia began to infect the troops. Men started refusing to walk on open trails, preferring to hack their way through the dense, vine-choked undergrowth, a process that was slow, exhausting, and loud. Patrols that should have taken an hour were now taking 5, as Marines froze at every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock, a commander on the front lines, reported in his dispatches that some of his soldiers were developing what he grimly termed sniper fever, a state of constant, high-strung paranoia so severe that they would fire wildly at any perceived movement in the trees, birds, monkeys, even leaves falling in the wind. The Japanese knew this, and they exploited it with sadistic precision. They didn't always shoot to kill. Sometimes they would deliberately wound a Marine with a shot to the leg or shoulder. The soldiers' cries for corpsmen would echo through the jungle, a perfect bait. And as his comrades rushed out to rescue him, the sniper would calmly wait, select his next target, and fire again. It was psychological warfare waged with bullets, and it was breaking the morale of the 1st Marine Division. Then, on August 18, 1942, something happened that would change everything. Captain Joseph Foss was inspecting the defensive perimeter near the all-important Henderson Field. The airfield was the strategic heart of the American presence on the island, and protecting it was paramount. As Foss conferred with his NCOs, that now infamous crack echoed from the jungle line. It was followed instantly by screams. Another Marine was down. The 4th man lost that day before noon. Foss, a man known for his aggressive flying style as a fighter ace, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated frustration. He stared at the impenetrable wall of green that had been bleeding his men dry for weeks. His gaze drifted about 220 yards away, where a battery of Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft guns was positioned. 4 massive cannons, each a masterpiece of engineering, designed to tear Japanese Zeros and Betty bombers out of the sky. They were built to engage targets flying hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of feet in the air. And in that moment of searing frustration, a thought sparked in Captain Foss's mind. A thought so unorthodox, so outside the bounds of conventional military doctrine, that it was either sheer genius or utter madness. He turned to his sergeant. "Why don't we use those damned cannons against the trees?" The sergeant in charge of the gun battery, a grizzled veteran named Thomas Murphy, stared at Foss as if he'd just suggested they attack the enemy with bayonets fixed to pineapples. The Bofors were anti-aircraft guns, precision instruments. Each 40-millimeter high-explosive shell weighed nearly 2 pounds and was packed with enough explosive filler to shred the thin aluminum skin of an aircraft. They had an effective ceiling of over 23,000 feet. Using them against a single man hidden in a tree was like hunting a mosquito with a sledgehammer. It was absurd, but Foss was not joking. The look in his eyes was deadly serious. He was done playing the sniper's game. He was done losing men to an enemy he couldn't see. He pointed a trembling, angry finger at the jungle. "Aim for the sector where we think that bastard is," he ordered, his voice tight with rage. "And you blow that goddamn tree apart until there's nothing left but splinters." The first Bofors gun opened fire at 14:23 hours. The sound was not a crack. It was a physical blow. A deafening, gut-punching whomp that ripped through the jungle, momentarily silencing every insect and bird for miles. Each shot from the Bofors produced 120 decibels of sound, enough to cause permanent hearing damage without protection. The gun crew, acting on instinct, fed clips into the autoloader. The cannon began to buck and roar, spitting out shells at its terrifying cyclic rate of 120 rounds per minute. Whomp, 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 whomp. In just 30 seconds, the 4-gun battery had hurled 60 high-explosive 40mm projectiles into a sector of jungle roughly 50 yards across. The result was apocalyptic. This was not artillery. This was deforestation on demand. The 40mm shells weren't just impacting the trees, they were detonating inside them. Each impact ripped away branches as thick as a man's arm. Towering coconut palms, which could absorb thousands of rifle rounds, were snapped in half like dry twigs, their tops cartwheeling through the air. The dense, leafy canopy that had hidden the Japanese snipers for weeks was vaporized, transformed into a lethal green and brown mist of pulverized leaves and razor-sharp wood splinters. When the guns finally fell silent and the acrid, blue smoke began to clear, a stunned group of Marines advanced into the ravaged clearing. The scene was one of utter devastation. Trees were stripped bare, their trunks looking like gnarled, skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The ground was a carpet of shredded vegetation and splintered wood. And amidst the wreckage, they found what they were looking for. 3 Japanese bodies, mangled and torn apart. One of them was still tied by his rope to a massive branch that had been blown clean off a tree and had plummeted 90 feet to the jungle floor. An examination of the bodies revealed the horrifying truth of the new tactic. Not a single one of them had been hit directly by a 40mm shell. They had been killed by their own cover. The shrapnel from the detonating shells and the thousands of high-velocity wood splinters had turned the entire tree into a giant, organic fragmentation grenade. The jungle itself had become the weapon. Captain Foss noted grimly in his after-action report, "The 40mm projectiles don't need precision when they destroy everything in a 50-foot radius." The weapon that shredded the jungle had been unleashed. The tactic was refined with ruthless American efficiency. The Marines developed what they called suppression sweeps, or tree busting. From that day on, when they suspected sniper activity in a given sector, they no longer sent patrols of men in to hunt them down. They simply called in the Bofors. The gun batteries would fire in a systematic, sweeping pattern. First, they would target the highest crowns of the trees, then the middle levels, and finally the dense undergrowth. A full sweep took about 4 minutes and consumed over 200 rounds of ammunition. The cost was, by any conventional measure, absurd. Each 40mm shell cost the equivalent of $47 in 1940s currency. A single 4-minute sweep represented almost $10,000 in ammunition, a staggering sum at the time. But the Marines on Guadalcanal had stopped dying from unseen assassins. And to the men on the ground, that was priceless. When precision fails, use overwhelming firepower. What the Japanese snipers had failed to anticipate was that they were not fighting a symmetrical war. They were facing an enemy with something they could never hope to match: limitless industrial capacity. For the Empire of Japan, every sniper was an irreplaceable national asset. He represented months, even years, of specialized training, tactical knowledge, and combat experience. To lose a sniper was to lose an enormous investment. For the United States, 200 rounds of 40mm ammunition was a rounding error in the vast ledger of the military budget. They could afford to fire 10,000 shells to kill one man if it meant another Marine got to go home. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, one of the few Japanese snipers captured alive on Guadalcanal, described the sheer terror of the Bofors barges during his interrogation. "We could hide from a man's eyes," he said through a translator, his own eyes wide with the memory. "We could dodge rifle bullets. We learned to read the wind and the light. But when the big cannon started, there was no escape. The entire tree would shake as if in an earthquake. Branches would rain down. The air itself became a storm of splinters that cut like knives. It was as if the sky itself was trying to kill us." Tanaka had been captured when the tree he was hiding in was literally shredded around him during a Bofors sweep. He survived the 90-foot fall with 3 broken ribs and shrapnel wounds in both legs, not from the shells, but from the shattered remains of the tree that had been his hiding place. If you're still watching this, you are a true student of history. Subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss the shocking conclusion of this deadly cat-and-mouse game. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. During August of 1942, before the systematic use of the Bofors guns, Japanese snipers killed 89 Marines on Guadalcanal. In September, after the implementation of the suppression sweeps, that number plummeted to 31. In October, only 12 Marines were killed by sniper fire. By November, Japanese snipers had effectively ceased to be a significant threat. It wasn't because they had all been eliminated. It was because the ones who remained were too terrified to pull the trigger. Every time a sniper fired his Arisaka, the crack of his rifle served as a beacon, revealing his general sector. And revealing his sector meant that, within minutes, the Sky Shredders would come for him. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some snipers attempted to fire and then immediately move, scrambling through the high canopy to a new position before the artillery response arrived. But moving through the treetops is a slow and deliberate process. The Bofors response came in under 3 minutes. It was a race they could never win. Others tried firing from lower positions in the undergrowth, but this sacrificed their greatest advantage: height. Without the high ground, they lost their ability to see the Marines before they themselves were seen. Many simply gave up. They would remain in their treetop perches, motionless, sometimes for days, hoping the front lines would move past them, leaving them behind enemy lines. They chose the slow death of starvation over the swift, explosive annihilation delivered by the Bofors. The tactic, born of desperation on Guadalcanal, quickly spread across the Pacific theater. At the bloody Battle of Tarawa, Marines used the Bofors preemptively, bombarding any tall structures or elevated positions that could possibly hide a sniper before the main assault even began. On Iwo Jima, the 40mm cannons were turned against the fortified Japanese cave networks. While the shells couldn't penetrate the deep volcanic rock, the concussive blasts at the cave entrances and the storm of rock shrapnel made the positions uninhabitable. By the time of the Okinawa campaign, the Japanese had almost completely abandoned treetop sniper tactics. They knew it was a suicidal gesture against an enemy willing and able to destroy entire forests to kill a single man. The total cost of the Bofors tree-busting campaign on Guadalcanal was approximately $340,000 in 40mm ammunition. The cost to recruit, train, and equip a Marine for combat in 1942 was roughly $17,000. The 77 Marines whose lives were statistically saved by the Bofors between August and November represented over $1 million in training investment. But the numbers, as staggering as they are, fail to capture the most critical factor: morale. The Marines, who for weeks had lived in constant, stomach-churning terror of an invisible enemy, suddenly held the ultimate power. They were no longer the hunted. They were the predators, armed with mobile artillery. Corporal Hay, the same Marine who had watched Sergeant Williams die on that muddy trail on August 7th, wrote a letter home to his family in October. Before, he wrote, "Walking through the jungle was like waiting for lightning to strike. You knew it could happen at any second, and there was nothing you could do about it. Now, when we hear a sniper shot, we smile, because we know what's coming next. And the Japs know it, too." What began as a single act of battlefield frustration by Captain Foss quickly became official military doctrine. The 1943 edition of the U.S. Marine Corps Field Manual included a new section, specifically detailing the use of anti-aircraft weaponry against ground targets in jungle environments, citing the experiences on Guadalcanal as the primary example. The Bofors 40mm gun, designed to kill planes thousands of feet in the air, had found a grim new purpose, turning the treetops of the Pacific into cemeteries for snipers. The final, bitter irony of this story came after the war. When Japanese military historians analyzed their own casualty figures from the Pacific campaigns, they discovered a horrifying pattern. Of the approximately 4,200 highly trained snipers deployed across the Pacific, less than 300 survived the war. Their mortality rate of 93% was the highest of any specialized military unit in the Japanese armed forces, higher than the kamikaze pilots, higher even than the operators of the Kaiten human torpedoes. The Japanese snipers had been too good, too effective for their own survival. Their initial success had provoked a response so disproportionate, so brutally industrial, that it turned their low-cost, high-impact tactic into a guaranteed death sentence. A captured Japanese commander in 1945 summarized the hard-learned lesson with undisguised bitterness. "We underestimated the Americans," he stated. "We thought they would answer our snipers with their own snipers. A rifleman against a rifleman. That is a fight we could have managed. Instead, they answer by destroying entire forests. How do you fight an enemy that can afford to demolish the jungle to kill one man?" It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was the candid admission of a defeat that began the moment a frustrated Marine captain looked at a battery of anti-aircraft guns and thought to himself, "Why not? What do you think of this brutal, yet undeniably effective tactic? Did you know about the crucial role anti-aircraft guns played in the war on the ground?" Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. Every week, we bring you verified and fast